have to look on both sides. So in 1967, when Israel comes into the old city, she's back over here after 2,000 years. All right, and since 1948 to 1967, all of this was controlled by Jordan. No Israeli could come to the wall and pray. And so it was very exciting. So what did we do? We just cleared up the whole neighborhood and made this huge plaza. You see the men praying. Unfortunately, from that point on, the Orthodox Jewry have been given control of our holiest site over here, which is divided into an area where the men and the women have separate areas. The women are below us, and this is where the men are. And you can see we use the prayer shawls. Do you see the little boxes on their heads? They're saying their prayer.
For all nations, not just for Jews. In fact, the founding of the temple, King Solomon prayed a long, long prayer that you can find in the book of 2 Kings, chapter 8. In his long, long prayer, it climaxes in him saying, "And when the people of all the nations hear of your great name and come toward this temple, please hear their prayers as well, that they might fear you as well." So this is ancient Judaism, expecting the temple to be a place where all the nations would be attracted, okay? This is also the site, this is jumping way ahead of ourselves, but just because we hear this day, I must, where Jesus overturned the tables of the money changers. In the time of Jesus, your sacrifices would take place up there, but of course you could purchase your lamb, or if you were poor, you didn't have to buy a lamb or a goat. You're allowed to sacrifice a dove, because if you were not rich enough, you couldn't afford a mammal, so you could buy a dove, and that could be your sacrifice. And the Gospels all say that Jesus zeroed in on the dove sellers, the people who were ripping off the poor, and those who were money changing. So these were Levites, the sort of semi-priests who were, according to Jesus, making money out of religion. It isn't just Jesus who says that. It's not an anti-Semitic thing to say that. The prophets of old said similar things about the priests, and we have Jewish writings from the period that also said the priests were too wealthy and opulent and ripping people off. So Jesus was part of that. The tables of the money changers and upended the tables of those selling doves. It says it happened right here, okay, in this court of the Gentiles. Okay, I want you to stand over here, please, and look back at this mosque here. So stand over there, walk about 20 paces that way, and then stand back and look at this mosque. Okay, turn around. Turn around. Look at the mosque. Or look at me. Okay. I want us to wind forward. Can you all hear me? 1,000 years after the time of Jesus. Islamic armies have now taken over all of the Middle East, half of Turkey, all of Egypt, all of North Africa, and into Spain. This is now, as you see it, the Al-Aqsa Mosque was here, the Golden Dome was here. It's the 1000s, and Muslims continue to expand. They are one of the greatest military nations since the Roman Empire. And the emperor of the Byzantine Empire, which is basically, well, the Byzantine Empire is the Christian continuation of the Roman Empire. We talk about the Roman Empire falling in the 400s, but it didn't fall at all. Only the West fell. The Eastern Empire just continued on its merry way. They still thought they were in the Roman Empire. And the Byzantine Christian Roman Empire ruled all these lands until the Muslims came through. Let's just call it 700 to give you a picture in your mind. And so for 300 years, these were Muslim lands with Muslim monuments. And in the 1060s, the Byzantine Emperor Alexius was worried that the Islamic armies were moving even further west in Turkey and they were about to take Constantinople. So he wrote to the western regions, to the Pope Urban II, begging for armies to come and help them to resist the Islamic encroachment, because the last of the Eastern Christian Empire was about to fall. The response from Pope Urban II was to have a big preaching tour throughout Europe, calling on the First Crusade and calling on Christian Westerners to come and fight the Islamic armies who had taken over Christian lands, had forbidden pilgrimage to come to these regions. Pope Urban II was incredibly successful. We don't have exact records of his preaching, but we do have letters he issued, papal bulls, and some reports. And basically he said, if you join this great fight, God will forgive all your sins. We could say it's the ultimate religious manipulation. And he got a massive response. And so from about 1097 through to 1099, tens of thousands of people volunteered themselves, some of them peasants, some of them lords, to come to this region and fight. It took them 18 months to make their way to the Holy Land. Along the way, as they moved along the Rhineland, it is to our shame, any Christian's shame, that some of the Crusader armies practiced their fighting skills on Jewish villages all throughout Europe, and literally massacred Jewish villages. And we have, unfortunately, a very good historical report of that. Key here was a guy called Peter the Hermit, who was like the great charismatic preacher and like a chaplain to the Crusades. And he led armies that slaughtered Jews. And they all eventually arrived here. Just turn behind you for 1 second. Mount of Olives. You imagine that day in July 1099, when well over 10,000 European Crusaders with full military dress filled that mount. Peter the Hermit was there. He preached up a storm. His key text was, "Take up your cross and follow me," which he took to mean take up your cross. The crusader, the word crusader comes from crucis, the Latin for cross, and they actually had a little cross patch on their shoulder or on their front. You may have seen the Crusaders in the movies. So take up your cross. The way they were interpreting it was take up your cross in the army and follow Jesus. He preached up a massive storm. He got them to march around the Jerusalem walls, almost like a reenactment of the Joshua incident centuries earlier around Jericho. And under Peter's preaching and the leadership of people like Ramon Aguilera, they breached the walls. They ran through the streets and breaching every law of just war tradition. Remember, the notion of just war had been a Christian tradition from the time of St. Augustine in the 5th century. And just war always had to be proportional, never kill innocents. You had to conduct yourself in war in a way that wouldn't leave the losers bitter. This was actually one of the rules of just war. It must only be defensive. and a few other principles. But they broke every tradition of just war. They were so fired up in the frenzy through Peter the Hermit, and they broke through the walls and discovered thousands of men, women and children, Muslims, huddled up here, thinking there's no way they would get up here. Some even climbed the roof of the mosque. The Crusaders burst through and they killed everyone. We have eyewitness accounts of it that talk about it being a great day of vindication of Christianity over the evil unbeliever. There are exaggerations in the sources. For instance, one of them says that we rode our horses with blood up to their, or whatever is the horsey term for that bit of the... Anyone know what the horsey term is? You know, for the, not the knee. They don't have knees. They have something. Anyway, let's just go with that. They rode in blood up to the knees of the horses. Now that's probably an exaggeration, but you are to imagine this platform we're on absolutely a massacre. They threw many people over the high walls. They climbed the roof and collected everyone off the roof, threw them off. And they won a stunning military victory. That's July 15, 1099. The next day, they walked 500 meters that way to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which we've pointed out several times, where they held a Thanksgiving service to praise Jesus for conquering the Muslims. That happened here, right where you're standing. And I remember having to film a scene about this for a documentary I was in. And I was standing right here telling the story, and the camera was here. And right next to my camera guy was someone given to us by the Al-Aqsa Mosque, our guide, a lovely woman who looked after us for the day, who was crying by the time I got through my lines. And so I had to look at camera with this Muslim woman in tears as I told the story. And I was just struck by the fact that 900 years has still left an open wound amongst many because of Christian bad behavior. Now, I think the Crusades are mixed. I think an argument can be made that theoretically the Crusade was a just war, not in the conduct, but in the reason they were coming to protect the Eastern Byzantine kingdom. But the way they conducted the war turned it from a just war into a despicable blight on the history of Christianity. And it would be easy to say, oh, but they weren't Christians. But I've read the primary sources, and they really loved Jesus and thought they were honouring Jesus. So I don't know what to do with that, except it makes me think not so much how could they do what they did, but I wonder what I'm doing that future generations will look back on and think, how could Dixon have done that? So, what are my blind spots? That's got nothing to do with the historical Jesus. In fact, one could almost say it's the opposite of the Jesus who taught here to love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, pray for those who mistreat you. He taught that here. And then 1,000 years later, some of his alleged followers did this. Of its basic size and location, facing east. Pilgrims would come up here. Well, as I said, 30,000 pilgrims committed, and you would present yourself to the priest there, and all the sacrifices would take place there. And there were priests and Levites would be constantly washing as well. washing the blood away. And Josephus says they were so good at the cleaning that you never saw a fly ever in the Temple Mount. He's probably exaggerating, but he's probably right that they were trying to keep it pure. So lots of blood, but always washed away. Always washed away. Can you hear me? Okay, right in front of us is the Grey Dome, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre.
Yay!
Sepulchre just being the word for tomb, and there's actually surprisingly good archaeological evidence that it was the tomb in which Jesus was laid, and I'll explain that when we get to it. But there's now a giant labyrinth of churches built over the top of it, belonging to 5 different denominations. So that's fun. But as I was explaining before, they after the massacre they marched up to the Sepulchre to hold their church service in 1099.
What year was it built? The church?
First built, so it's been, it's collapsed and caught fire, but first built in the early to mid 300s. Yeah. But I'll explain why they chose that site. It's one of those ones where I'm less skeptical. Like I said yesterday, there's no way we can know that that's where Peter betrayed Jesus and heard the cock crow. But here there are actually decent reasons, not only for thinking it fits the description of the tomb, but that there was a very clear memory from first century Christians that this was the site, that was the site. But anyway, that's fun for another day.